There were empty fictions as if they were sunk in sleep and found themselves in disturbing dreams. Either there is a place to which they are fleeing, or without strength they come from, having chased after others, or they are involved in striking blows, or they are receiving blows themselves, or they have fallen from high places, or they take off into the air, though they do not even have wings. Again, sometimes it is as if people were murdering them, or they themselves are killing their neighbors, for they have been stained with their blood. When those who are going through all these things wake up, they see nothing, those who were in the midst of all these disturbances, for they are nothing. Such is the way of those who have cast ignorance aside from them like sleep, not esteeming it as anything, nor do they esteem its works as solid things either, but leave them behind like a dream in the night. From the Gnostic, quote, Gospel of Truth, end of quote, the Nightmare Parable, circa 150 AD. The masks brought forth slow dances made up on the spot and named after the fact. Festive despair, nightmare, fly catching. In every case, the masks affirmed the existence of a language no one knew how to speak, but which contained the only words capable of forming the only truths worth knowing. Trabadia la Modhir was turning into the Philosopher's Stone. The Dadaists were going back in time, falling through the stage. Modern artists, Ball would write in 1917, are Gnostics and practice things that the priests think are long forgotten, perhaps even commit sins that are no longer thought possible. These were the sins to be found in an embrace of ancient heresy, the belief that certain forms of knowledge, of gnosis, accessible only to a few, could bring one so close to the Godhead that the seeker would drive God out of time as if God had never been. In the early Christian era, even as the church drove the Gnostics out of history, the rituals they practiced continued, with their gospels burned and adherence to them punishable by death. Some adepts, the historian Benjamin Walker writes, remained familiar with the reputed occult virtues of sound and the latent potency of sacred names, hermetic formulas, and magical invocations. The most important of all sounds, they believed, is the phoneme, which is the smallest articulable sound unit. There evolved in time the practice of singing each vowel sound of the Greek alphabet in a single breath, combining the vowels with certain consonants, especially those producing a buzzing or humming sound. Ziza, Zizo, Zoza, Ozzy, Amazu, Nozama, Omenaz, Erazaz. As far as possible, these archaic syllables were used in unaltered form, even when their meaning, if they had any, was forgotten. The Dadaists were coming into the knowledge that what had been forgotten could be remembered, even by accident. They were realizing that the language everyone knew how to speak was capable of forming only those truths they didn't want to hear. They didn't know what they wanted to hear, so they made a sound they called medieval brutism. Noise with imitative effects. A simultaneous poem, all the acts appearing at the same time, but no longer acts. It meant wails, the bass drum, glissandos, prehistoric harmony, cries of pain and hilarity. If the Dadaists did not replace God, they replaced themselves. Holzenbeck. The problem of the soul is by nature volcanic. Every movement naturally produces noise. While number, and consequently melody, are symbols presupposing a faculty for abstraction, noise is a direct call to action. Music of whatever nature is harmonious, artistic, an activity of reason, but brutism is life itself. It cannot be judged like a book, but rather it is a part of our personality, which attacks us, pursues us, and tears us to pieces. Brutism is a way of looking at life which, strange as it may seem at first, compels us to make an absolute decision. There are only brutists, and others In modern Europe, the same initiative which in America made ragtime a national music led to the convulsion of Brutism. Here, Holzenbeck, who at the time, 1920, was lecturing to a psychiatrists' convention in the free city of Danzig, today Dansk, where he had set up a practice in 1922, stepped out from behind his lectern, did a few steps of the Eagle Rock, pulled a paper bag over his head, scribbled blindly on it with a grease pen, punched out eye holes, drew a pistol from his jacket, and fired a full clip of blanks at the audience. The half dozen or so who had seen the act before were primed to applaud. Ha! Thank you. Brutism. Well, you see, Brutism is a kind of return to nature. It is the music produced by circuits of atoms. At this point, a member of Holzenbeck's claque rose from his chair and fired a pistol filled with blanks at Holzenbeck, who bit down on a capsule secreted in his mouth, causing fake blood to drip down his chin and over his shirt front. He grabbed the lectern and continued speaking, bent over and turned away from his listeners. Death ceases to be an escape of the soul from earthly misery and becomes a vomiting, screaming, and choking. The Dadaists of the Cabaret Voltaire took over Brutism without suspecting its philosophy. Basically, they desired its opposite, a calming of the soul, an endless lullaby, art, abstract art. They wanted the moral safety valve. Disgusted by the butchery of World War I, we devoted ourselves to the fine arts. Our sort of Candide against the times. Our sort of four-ply comforter. But Dada grew into a creature which stood head and shoulders above all present. Do you understand? We are psychiatrists. We are Germans. We have read Nietzsche. We know that to gaze too long at monsters is to risk becoming one. That's what we get paid for. It all came together on 23 June 1916 in the Cabaret, unless it was July 14th in a rented hall, when Hugo Ball dressed up like a sorcerer in the weird costume, designed by Janko, built out of cardboard by his brother. It was fun to do it, Jules Janko said in 1984, and even more fun to undo it. On Hugo Ball's head was a blue and white striped hat 2 feet high. His body was covered in an obelisk painted blue. Huge claws replaced his hands. Wings, red on the inside and gold on the outside, went down to his waist. As Ball chanted his sounds, 2 different poems on reading stands at his sides, he flapped his arms like a bird. It was a moment of panic. Hugo Ball suddenly realized he didn't understand what the costume was demanding of him. Didn't recognize the audience, didn't know what his empty words, blago bung, basso fataka, didn't mean. In his terror, he felt himself drawn back to the cadences of a priest celebrating the Mass as he, little Hugo, knelt with his mother and father 2 decades before. The years rose up, then died. It was a moment of hubris and fear that took Ball straight out of Dada, opened the road back to the church, and eventually got him on TV.